Okay, this video is about the nature of philosophy. It's a little more of a focus because we're doing perspectives of philosophy, remember? So we want to see Nietzsche's alternative vision of philosophy. I guess the quickest way to think about it is philosophy is a fiction. Philosophy is something you make up, but you don't just make it up. It's made up to give meaning to life. So um, yet it's not true. It's not the true version of life. There's no such thing as that. But it's a version that's life affirming and life giving. The we'll be talking about the first two sections, but the first section is called the prejudices of the philosophers, and so that gives rise to the first question: what is the prejudices of the philosophers? What is he talking about? A prejudice has several meanings. I mean, if you look it up in the dictionary, the most appropriate, I think, for Nietzsche is a kind of a leaning formed without just grounds before sufficient knowledge. Okay, so I think the intent here is to say that whatever the philosophers are doing, they're not telling us the truth, even though they claim to be telling us the truth. They're just giving their prejudices, their leanings. Okay, some of the words that Nietzsche used are instincts, their autobiography. Okay, so he says in 5 that philosophy is at bottom a prejudice, a notion, an inspiration, generally a desire of the heart, sifted and made abstract, and is defended by philosophers with reasons sought after the fact. This sounds a lot like James, if you remember. James talked about philosophy being what? A temperament that is rarefied with logic. Okay? The other thing that I would talk about here, philosophers are, he says, they use the will to truth. This is connected in Nietzsche's mind. I think it's just a specific way that philosophers express what Nietzsche calls the will to power. And we need to talk a little bit about that. It's a notion that Nietzsche is not always, he doesn't anywhere talk about it just all by itself, but for him it seems to be the way the world works. So in 6 he says, accordingly I do not believe that an impulse to knowledge is the father of philosophy. Okay, that's the way Socrates might put it. I just want to know what's true and become a wise man. But that another impulse, here as elsewhere, my emphasis, has only made use of knowledge and mistaken knowledge, my emphasis, because remember it's a fiction, as an instrument. Okay, so philosophy, like everything else, is an expression or is ruled by will to power. And will to power is an instinctive, unconscious drive to domination. So producing grand fictions that we force on the world to give it meaning and force on everybody else would be an act of domination. The will to untruth is also a kind of domination too, where we dominate the will to truth and undo it. Okay, so everything for Nietzsche is will to power. As he says, it has gradually become clear to me that every great philosophy has hitherto been a confession on the part of its author, so an expression of our inmost selves to force it on the world. Okay, so we have a weird inversion of the Cartesian cogito, right? Where Descartes started with himself and tried to work out all knowledge from himself. But this is not a discovery of the truth. It's not even a discovery of yourself. That would be too much for Nietzsche. It's simply an imposition. So philosophy is an example of the will to power is only a creation. Excuse me. Okay. Another point he makes about the will of power in 13. A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Notice the word he uses, discharge. Like, you discharge a battery. You just pull it out, knock it out. Life itself is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent results thereof. In short, here as everywhere else, let us beware of superfluous teleological principles. So a teleological principle is a principle about purpose. It's a plan that I've got a goal in mind and I'm trying to go out in the world and achieve that goal. Okay. We talked about that the recognition of that in Boethius and St. Thomas Aquinas is the beginning of their proof that God is the only thing in the world that can satisfy us, and God is the point of our lives. Now, Nietzsche is saying those sorts of things are superfluous. We don't need them, right? Superfluous is something is unnecessary. There isn't any theological principles. There's only raw forces knocking each other, and the greater one wins. Okay, so Nietzsche he's a physicalist, he's a materialist. He doesn't believe in spiritual realities. This is the way everything runs. Physically, when one group of people dominates another people. Okay, so a good example might be Attila the Hun, or the Germans in World War II. At least they tried to. But there's also spiritual domination of others. And here Nietzsche brings up the example of the Stoics. That philosophy always creates the world in its own image. Again, its own image is the image of the philosopher. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse. See how he puts it there. It's not a purpose. I want to run the world, but rather I've got to run the world. That's what I try to do. I'm either going to win, or I'm going to succeed, or I'm going to fail. But philosophy is the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to causa prima. So it's not simply dominating, I want to run things, I want to be in charge, but I want to create the world. Okay, so ideas are much more powerful. So if you want to fix things, if you want to bring meaning to the world, you don't go conquer your next door countries, but you become a philosopher and you conquer the world with ideas. Ideas take over. Okay, and so later on we're going to talk about how can we fix our situation, since we've undone this great way of meaning to our lives. Well, let's become philosophers and create a new meaning. It's going to be a little tricky because we can't let anybody really know we're doing it. We have to play kind of a couple duplicitous games. We'll see that in a minute. Okay, so as we said, philosophy always creates the world in its own image. So philosophers are gods in a way, right? That's what that's suggesting. I think he means to use that language on purpose. Okay, a little break in the action. How does Nietzsche know this? I mean, it's cool. It's kind of interesting. I think it's kind of fun to think about. It's kind of nothing people haven't said before. But can it be true that there is no truth? That's the first question. The second question, no truth would, if it's true, imply that a philosophy can't discover it. Okay, I get that. But is Nietzsche's story the correct one? Is he got the correct story about philosophy? Why believe him here? And if philosophy is just a fiction, it wouldn't follow that there is no truth. It just would follow that philosophy doesn't try to get at it. So there's still a lot of gaps here, and I don't know if Nietzsche is actually filling those gaps in. And these are some of the problems that came up with James too. So we might more be accepting Nietzsche's view because of the force of his story rather than because of the force of his logic. But why would he be committed to logic, to trying to prove this? That would sort of say that there really is a truth. It's just that what we think is true is not true. But that's not Nietzsche's view. Nietzsche's view is more there's no truth. Okay, second point to this whole thing is to talk about the second section, the free spirit. Now I think you should understand the free spirit as the new fictionalizers, because philosophy creates fiction. Philosophizing is just creating your own meanings, creating the world in your own image, as we just saw. Okay, so I won't do it here, but you might look at 24 and 25, the first two sections of that part, and ask yourself how they retell the story that we've been telling about philosophy. Okay, there's some interesting points made there. I'll just talk a little bit about this free spirit. In other places, he calls it the overman. That's where we talked about it in the last video. This is called a new species of philosopher, a new kind of philosopher. So Nietzsche doesn't think philosophers need to go, but rather philosophers have kind of made a bad step here, kind of caused a lot of problems by the steps they've taken. These free spirits will create new social values, which are new fictions, right? Because everything is a fiction that works, that's life-affirming. Ones which will challenge and overturn the current social values. They might rightly be described, he calls them later, as attempters. Okay, so they've got to try different things. So they have to be willing to try a lot of things. Okay, because who knows what's going to work? Sort of looking back on why Platonism worked. Well, Plato didn't set out to do that. He set out to do something different, and in the midst of his falsity, Nietzsche's view, he did something great. Now, how would we consciously do that? That's Nietzsche's problem. How would that consciously happen by somebody who knows that I'm creating a fiction, but I got to get people to believe it, and I need to not let them know that it's false. So they would not be tied down to dogma or truth or certainty. That's the way of modern philosophy. That's Descartes. They would be still radical skeptics. So they would be kind of like Descartes on steroids. Maybe that's an interesting image to keep in mind here. They would be working against Christian democratic order, because that's part of the problem. They will too be free, very free spirits. Okay, so that's why he keeps using that language. Okay, in 44 he talks about that the free spirit would be beyond good and evil. He also mentioned that in 4, and that's the title of his book, right? They would not suffer or defend truth, so they're not supposed to die for truth. Remember, Socrates is the guy we're thinking about here. You know well enough that it cannot matter in the least whether you are in the right, just as no philosopher hitherto has been in the right, and that a more praiseworthy veracity may lie in every little question mark placed after your favorite words and theories. That's Descartes, right? I may not be right, but I'm trying to be right, okay? That's not Descartes, that's Socrates, okay? But you can't do that because you know you're not right. We've sort of seen how this works, okay? So you're not going to die for this truth. That's not the way you're going to do it. The martyrs of Christianity also, in a way, succeeded in putting Christianity into place by their martyrdom. But Nietzsche realized this isn't going to work, and Nietzsche doesn't want to be a martyr here. They'll be very independent and isolated, okay, because they're playing with a very dangerous idea. And the dangerous idea is that this is not really true, but I need to get people to think that it's true. They will admit nothing is real, so they won't. They are aware of what's going on here, so they have to be. They can't fool themselves, but in the midst of them, they can't let the game on. Okay, so this gets to a really interesting thing about them in 31 and 40, that they will be constantly disintegrating. They will keep changing, and they will love the mass. They will love fooling people about what's going on. For the majority will always misunderstand truly deep thoughts. They think they're true. If you thought Plato was giving you the truth and you were jazzed by that and wanted to study it more, you were fooled by Plato. Okay, but we needed you to be fooled. So such a hidden man who instinctively uses speech for silence and concealment and is exhaustible in evading communication wants a mask of him to roam the heads and hearts of his friends in his stead. And he makes sure that it does so. Supposing he does not want it, he will one day come to see that a mask is there in spite of that, and that is a good thing. Again, because the meaning he's creating is a fiction, but people can't know that. Independence and flexibility of mind, and having no attachments, not to your people, to your loved ones, to your country, to pity. You don't want people to feel sorry for you. You don't want people to believe in science. You want people to believe that you like being detached. So he's very demanding on what the free spirit's going to look like. Okay, and he talks about him in a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which you might look at if you have a chance, if you want to follow up on the ideas here that Nietzsche is presenting. He needs to be brave too, okay? One should not avoid one's tests, although they are perhaps the most dangerous games one could play. Dangerous because if you get found out, then you're done. Your philosophy is not going to work. Great attempters, we saw that, so they will be trying a lot of things. We don't know what's going to work. In fact, even if you try to think about it, then you're putting purpose in it. Well, maybe if I fix it here or do a little bit of work here, it will work better. You can't do that. You just got to present it out in a way because you're not really in control of it. So this is the other part of Nietzsche's materialism, that you're not really doing this purposely. You're trying to create conditions where the right thing will come up out of you. No one is likely to consider a doctrine true merely because it makes happy or makes virtuous. Something might be true, although at the same time harmful and dangerous in the highest degree. Indeed, it could pertain to the fundamental nature of existence that a complete knowledge of it would destroy me. So we're seeing a list of various virtues, just like we saw with Socrates, for what a philosopher needs to be. But the virtues are set up towards the idea of producing unconsciously a meaning, which is a fiction, which is going to give meaning to everybody's life. So it's an odd sort of process he's got, and it's a little complicated to keep in mind what he's trying to do. But I hope you can see how many of these sorts of ideas would fit with that view, if that was your view of what philosophy is all about. Okay. So a couple last questions. Is it really true that we never really act for a purpose? Can we really think we're acting for a purpose, but not really take that seriously? We think we do, and can we fool ourselves into doing it too? And if we accept purposeless activity, notice what's going on here. That's St. Thomas, right? And Boethius. They believed that there was a purpose to life, that we were aware that there was a purpose to life, and that was the beginning that led them down to the fact that God must exist. So you can see why Nietzsche's not going to go there. Okay, their way of solving this problem was very clear. Just convince everybody, teach them that God exists and God's like this, and this is the point of your life. Nietzsche doesn't have that option because he doesn't believe in those things. So he can only, in a way, set up us for a solution, right? He can't even be the solution himself. He doesn't know. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, right? But he doesn't know how it's going to work out because he, like the rest of us, have to wait for this domination. So it's a weird, funny sort of world and a funny sort of solution that he's offering us.